Aileen Carol Warno was born on February 29th, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, into a dysfunctional family that lacked stability, love, and care from the very beginning. Her mother was a teenager, and her father was incarcerated and suffered from severe mental illness. Eileen's early years were spent in the care of her grandparents, but the atmosphere in the house was far from peaceful. Her memories of those years are filled with feelings of fear, humiliation, and loneliness. It was then that her distrust of people and her conviction that the world is cruel began to take root. By the time she reached adolescence, Eileen found herself on the streets. Without family, education, or support, she survived as best she could, forming a protective barrier against the outside world. Rejection by her loved ones and society turned her into a withdrawn and suspicious person. During those years, she repeatedly came to the attention of the police for petty offenses, fights, and fraud. Attempts to start a new life, find a job, or build relationships ended in quarrels and flight. Her life increasingly turned into an endless struggle for survival, where every day was like the one before. In the mid-1980s, Warnos moved to Florida, hoping to start over. There she met Tyria Moore, a woman who became her closest friend and only source of emotional support. Their relationship was complicated, but it was with Tyria that Eileen first experienced a sense of family and acceptance. However, due to constant financial difficulties, Aileen found herself back in the vicious circle of street life. Her inner turmoil, outbursts of anger and anxiety intensified, leading to unstable behavior and the exacerbation of old traumas. From the end of 1989, Warnos's life changed dramatically. Within a short period of time, she found herself at the center of a high-profile investigation. The investigation established that Aileen had attacked men she met on the roads of Florida. She herself claimed that she was defending herself against aggression, but the court ruled otherwise. In January 1991, she was arrested after Tyria Moore agreed to cooperate with the investigation. This moment was a turning point for Eileen. She lost not only her freedom, but also the only person she trusted. The trial, which took place in 1992, became one of the most high-profile in the state's history. Lawyers insisted that the woman suffered from severe mental disorders caused by childhood trauma and chronic stress. Psychiatrists did diagnose her with borderline and antisocial personality disorders, but the court found her sane and responsible for her actions. Eileen received several life sentences, replacing the death penalty. She spent the next 10 years in isolation. Her mental state gradually deteriorated. She suffered from depression, anxiety, and paranoia. In letters and interviews, Aileen often reflected on her life, her mistakes, and how circumstances had turned her into a person she herself did not understand. Despite her loneliness, she wrote about her hope that her story would serve as a warning to others. Aileen Warnos died on October 9, 2002, in Florida. After her death, her ashes were scattered under a tree in Michigan. Judias Ana Lu Buenoano, better known as Judy Buenoano, was born on April 4, 1943, in Quan, Texas, into a poor and dysfunctional family. After her mother's death, the girl and her younger brother ended up with their grandmother, and then with their father and stepmother, with whom they had an extremely difficult relationship. According to neighbors' recollections, the atmosphere in the house was one of constant pressure and conflict, which greatly influenced the girl's character. As a teenager, Judy developed a rebellious streak, for which she spent several months in a juvenile detention center. After her release, she enrolled in a school for troubled teenagers and graduated in 1960, determined to change her life and become a nurse. Even then, those around her noted her strength of character, ambition, and ability to carefully hide her emotions behind a reserved exterior. In the early 1960s, Judy gave birth to her son Michael and married U.S. Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear. It seemed that she had found her place in life, peace, stability, and confidence in the future. However, her family life turned out to be difficult. After her husband's sudden death in 1971, Judy received a large insurance payout, which was the first link in a long chain of events that led to her sad fame. She soon moved to Colorado, where she met Bobby Joe Morris. Their relationship also ended tragically, and Judy again received financial benefits. No one suspected anything untoward. Buenoano always appeared composed, attentive, and sincerely grieving. She soon changed her surname, choosing the Spanish name Buenoano, which meant good year, as if trying to symbolically start a new life. But behind this new identity lay the same cold calculation and desire to control everything around her. By 1980, her son Michael, the only person close to her, became seriously ill. Sometime later, he died under mysterious circumstances, and Judy received another insurance payout. After that, she opened a small beauty salon, led an active social life, and seemed like a confident, prosperous woman. However, soon disturbing details began to appear behind the facade. New relationships, strange incidents, and patterns that later attracted the attention of investigators. In 1983, she met John Gentry, an entrepreneur from Orlando. Their relationship seemed stable. Judy took care of her partner, offered him vitamins, and helped him with his business. However, the man was soon seriously injured in an accident, and the police investigation unexpectedly led to Judy. Experts found strange substances in the pills she gave her partner, and also discovered similarities with previous episodes in her life. Expert examinations and subsequent checks showed that there was a common thread behind the series of tragedies. The trials against Buenoano lasted several years. In 1984, she was found guilty of the death of her son and the attempted murder of John Gentry, and a year later, of the death of her husband, James Goodyear. Investigators also found that she had systematically defrauded insurance companies by staging accidents and arson. These episodes shaped the image of a woman willing to cross any moral boundaries for profit and power. In conclusion, Judy remained coldly calm and confident that her actions were justified. Psychologists who observed her noted a unique combination of intelligence, self-control, and emotional detachment. She did not seek sympathy or ask for leniency, which made her image even more enigmatic. On March 30th, 1998, the sentence was carried out in Florida. Judy Buenoano became the first woman in the state's history to receive this type of punishment since the 19th century, and the first in the country since 1976. Her last words, a short, "No, sir," only reinforced the impression of her cold, withdrawn character. Mary Dean Arrington was born on August 8, 1933 in the United States, and went down in history as one of the most famous female fugitives of her time. Her life story is a drama intertwined with personal tragedies, outbursts of rage, a sense of injustice, and a desire for revenge. Arrington became the second woman to be included in the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, and her story remained in the criminal chronicles of the 20th century for a long time. Mary's early years were difficult. She grew up in an unstable family that lacked warmth and support. From an early age, she displayed a quick temper and independence, which later played a fateful role. In her youth, she married former police officer Lester Jack Arrington. Their union was turbulent and full of conflict. On July 4th, 1964, an incident occurred between the spouses that ended in tragedy. The court found Arrington guilty of manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but was released early. Later, in her old age, Mary admitted that she had indeed tried to cover up the incident, which added a mythical touch to her story. After her release, Arrington tried to start her life over. She raised her son and daughter, worked, and tried to stay out of the spotlight. But soon, new trials befell the family. In 1967, her son Lloyd Dean, who was only 18 years old, was tried for participating in a robbery. Although the damage was insignificant, the sentence came as a shock to the family. Lloyd was given a life sentence, while his partner received a suspended sentence. Mary believed that the public defender, Bob Pierce, who defended her son, had let him down by advising him to plead guilty. This situation became the breaking point for the woman. A few months later, Arrington, overcome with anger and despair, went to the lawyer to settle the matter personally. But fate had other plans. A conflict ensued, resulting in the death of one of Pierce's office staff, Vivian Ritter. The investigation determined that Arrington had kidnapped the woman, believing that this would help her get revenge on the lawyer. When the police found evidence, including threatening notes and witness statements, Mary's guilt became obvious. In December 1968, the court found Arrington guilty and sentenced her to death. However, the story was just beginning. On March 1st, 1969, she made a daring escape from Marion County Jail. Using whatever tools she could find, Mary climbed out of a window and disappeared, leaving the guards baffled. Soon her name appeared in federal reports. She became the second woman to be included in the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives list. For 3 years, Arrington lived under aliases, wandering around the southern United States. She worked as a waitress, saleswoman, and nanny, skillfully hiding from the police. She later admitted that those years were full of fear and adrenaline. I knew that every new day could be my last in freedom. In 1972, Mary was finally arrested without resistance. Years were added to her sentence for escaping, but soon the U.S. Supreme Court abolished the death penalty, and the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Thus, fate came full circle. Arrington returned to where she had once escaped from, Lowell Women's Prison. In prison, she behaved calmly, almost indifferently. Prison staff remembered her as a woman with a strong character, but without a trace of remorse. Over time, her story became a legend, an example of how personal pain and a sense of injustice can push a person down a path from which there's no return. Mary Dean Arrington died on May 10, 2014 at the age of 80 from heart failure. Tina Lasonia Brown, born on July 19, 1970, went down in American criminal history as one of the most famous women sentenced to death in Florida. Her name became known after the tragic events of 2010, when, against the backdrop of personal conflict and jealousy, an incident occurred that shocked even the most experienced investigators. This episode became one of the most high-profile cases of the 21st century in the state, and still provokes debate among lawyers, psychologists, and journalists. Born and raised in a small town in the southern United States, Tina seemed like an ordinary woman in her youth, energetic, determined, and stubborn. She became a mother at an early age, raised her daughter Brittany, tried to stay afloat, worked, and attempted to build a stable life. However, behind this outward normality lay inner chaos. People who knew her well recalled that she could be kind and caring, but would flare up instantly if she felt hurt or treated unfairly. By 2010, Brown was living in a mobile home park in Escambia County. Her adult daughter Brittany and 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman, a girl with whom Brown initially had a friendly relationship, lived next door. However, everyday disagreements and rumors about personal relationships between young people led to growing tension. It all started with minor quarrels, which eventually turned into hostility. After one altercation, Tina took what had happened as a direct insult and began to talk about revenge. On March 24, 2010, Tina invited Adriana to her home, saying she wanted to make up. However, according to the investigation, the meeting turned into a conflict that ended in tragedy. Together with her daughter Brittany Miller and neighbor Heather Trinny Lee, Brown took the girl out of town. There, events took place that were later classified as first-degree murder. Despite her serious injuries, Adriana managed to get to the nearest house and report the names of her attackers. Her testimony became key to the investigation. The investigation lasted several weeks and showed that Tina was not a random participant, but the organizer of the actions. According to the prosecution, she acted deliberately and cold-bloodedly, directing the events. Brown was arrested that same month, and soon she, her daughter, and Heather Lee were charged with kidnapping and murder. The trial, which took place in the summer of 2012, attracted enormous media interest. Reporters covered every detail of the case, and public opinion was divided. The jury found Brown guilty in less than an hour. Judge Gary Burgosh, in handing down the sentence, emphasized that there was no sign of remorse in her actions and that the crime was particularly cruel. On September 28, 2012, the court handed down the death sentence, unanimously upholding the jury's decision. After the verdict was announced, Tina showed no emotion, which only heightened public interest. Her lawyers filed appeals, claiming that the defense had been flawed and that some of the witness testimony may have been unreliable. The Florida Supreme Court reviewed the case several times, but all appeals were denied. By the mid-2010s, Tina Brown was the only woman in Florida awaiting execution. She's being held in isolation at the Lowell Correctional Institution, where conditions are strict and inmates spend almost all their time in solitary confinement. According to prison officials, Brown is calm, rarely interacts with others, and spends a lot of time reading religious books. Psychiatrists who have examined her personality have noted impulsiveness, emotional instability, and signs of personality disorder, exacerbated by years of stress, poverty, and family problems. Some experts believe that she was prone to emotional outbursts when her emotions completely overwhelmed her rational thinking. The story of Tina Lasonia Brown remains one of the most controversial in modern U.S. judicial practice. For some, she is the embodiment of cold calculation. For others, she is a symbol of how accumulated trauma and despair can lead a person to the brink of the abyss. Doris D.D. Moore, born in 1970, went down in American criminal history as one of the most notorious criminals convicted of first-degree murder. Her case became a symbol of how greed and manipulation can turn trust into a weapon. The story of Moore and Abraham Shakespeare, a Florida lottery winner, shocked the country and served as a warning about the dark side of sudden wealth. Shakespeare won $30 million in 2006, an event that was supposed to change his life for the better. However, wealth brought not freedom, but a heavy burden. A simple worker, he found himself the center of attention of people who wanted to take advantage of his naivety. According to friends, Shakespeare was a good-natured and generous man who often helped those around him, without expecting anything in return. But by 2008, he was exhausted by constant requests and attempts to deceive him. It was then that Doris Moore appeared in his life, introducing herself as a writer who dreamed of telling the real story of a winner. Behind the mask of friendliness and sympathy lay cold calculation. Moore quickly found a way to get close to Shakespeare and win his trust. She claimed that she wanted to help him put his finances in order and protect him from dishonest acquaintances. In reality, she gradually took control of his money, his house, and his rent, which brought in about $1.5 million annually. Prosecutors later claimed that Moore removed everyone who could have noticed something was wrong from his life, making herself the sole source of information and trust. When Shakespeare disappeared in 2009, Doris assured everyone that he had gone on vacation and was tired of people who wanted his money. She even sent messages on his behalf, trying to create the appearance of normality. But his loved ones quickly suspected deception. The messages did not have his usual style and expressions, and Moore herself contradicted herself in her explanations. The police investigation gradually led investigators to a house associated with Moore. In January 2010, a concrete slab was found on the property, under which Shakespeare's remains were found. Moore tried to deny involvement, putting forward confusing versions about some unknowns, but the evidence said otherwise. Her arrest was the end of a story that began with trust and ended in tragedy. At the trial, prosecutors presented a convincing picture of a cold, calculating woman who saw her victim only as a source of personal gain. Assistant District Attorney Jay Pruner called her a master manipulator who knew how to use trust as a tool of power. In the courtroom, Moore behaved calmly, sometimes even confidently, denying guilt and shifting responsibility to other people. The defense claimed that the murder was committed by unknown persons, but there was no evidence to support this version. After a 3-hour deliberation, the jury found her guilty unanimously. Judge Emmett Battles, in handing down the sentence, emphasized the exceptional degree of premeditation and cynicism in her actions. He called Moore one of the most manipulative people he had ever dealt with. The court sentenced Doris Moore to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and added another 25 years for using a weapon in the commission of the crime. All her subsequent appeals were rejected. The courts unanimously confirmed that the evidence of her guilt was compelling and consistent. Today, Doris D.D. Moore is serving a life sentence in a Florida state correctional facility. According to journalists who visited her in prison, she still denies her guilt and claims to be a victim of circumstance. Kimberly Kessler is an American criminal convicted of murdering 34-year-old hairdresser Jolene Cummings, a mother of 3 who went missing in May 2018. The case caused a huge public outcry in Florida and far beyond, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but also because of the strange, sometimes frightening behavior of the defendant, who behaved extremely erratically throughout the investigation and trial. On May 12, 2018, Jolene Cummings finished her shift at the Tangles Beauty Salon in Fernandina Beach, where she worked with Kimberly Kessler, and disappeared without a trace. She did not return home and did not answer her phone, which immediately alarmed her family. A few days later, her car was found near a shopping center, but there were no signs of a struggle. The investigation quickly focused on Kessler, the last person to see Jolene alive. A check revealed that Kimberly Kessler, who was 50 at the time, had been hiding under fake names for many years. She used 17 aliases in 14 states, lived in rented apartments, worked in hair salons, stores, and even offices, never staying anywhere for long. Her past was almost completely erased. Her family lost contact with her in 2004 and considered her missing. During a search of the Tangles Salon, investigators found abundant traces of blood belonging to Cummings. The victim's DNA was found on tools and surfaces, and surveillance cameras recorded Kessler leaving the premises shortly after her colleague's disappearance. Although Cummings' body was never found, the combination of evidence, including traces, records, and the defendant's behavior, allowed the police to bring a first-degree murder charge. From the very beginning of the trial, Kimberly behaved inappropriately. She shouted insults, refused to accept lawyers, and claimed that she was being persecuted by the government. The court repeatedly ordered psychiatric evaluations. At first, she was declared temporarily incompetent, but later doctors confirmed that she was aware of what was happening. Despite this, Kessler continued to behave unpredictably. During hearings, she would suddenly fall silent or yell at the judge. In prison, her mental state rapidly deteriorated. She went on hunger strike, losing weight rapidly, threw tantrums, and destroyed property in her cell. Prison staff were forced to resort to force feeding to keep her alive. Her behavior became the subject of separate discussion in the media. Journalists described Kessler as one of the most unpredictable defendants in the history of the state court. When the hearings finally began, the defendant hardly participated in the proceedings. Judge James Daniel ordered her to be transferred to a separate room, where she watched the proceedings via video link to avoid disruptions and threats. The prosecution presented compelling evidence, including DNA test results and testimony from colleagues who noticed suspicious signs of cleaning in the salon on the night of the disappearance. The trial lasted several weeks. The jury carefully examined the evidence, and prosecutors emphasized that Kessler led a double life, lied to everyone, and showed no remorse. In December 2022, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. In sentencing her, the judge stated that even if life imprisonment were not mandatory, I would still impose it, calling her actions cold-blooded, calculated, and devoid of human compassion. Kimberly Kessler was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, as well as an additional 25 years for using a weapon in the commission of a serious crime. All appeals filed by her defense were rejected. Today, she is serving her sentence in a maximum security prison in Florida. Psychiatrists consider her case to be a unique example of a combination of severe personality disorders and narcissistic psychopathy. Her behavior, which combines cold calculation and bouts of madness, continues to attract the interest of criminologists and psychologists. Tiffany Ann Cole, born on December 3, 1981, in South Carolina, was a woman whose life initially showed no signs of tragedy. Raised in a loving and prosperous family, she received an education, worked in the service industry, and, according to her acquaintances, was always smiling and responsive. But behind her outward kindness lay an inner vulnerability, a strong dependence on the influence of others, a desire to be accepted, and a desire for material stability. These traits made her particularly susceptible to pressure and manipulation, especially after meeting the man who would determine her fate, Michael James Jackson. Jackson had a strong will and a domineering personality. He quickly subjugated Tiffany, drawing her into a world of petty scams and risky adventures. For a girl who lacked strong moral boundaries, it all started with minor transgressions, but gradually she lost sight of where a casual misdemeanor ended and a crime began. Against this backdrop, she re-established contact with an elderly couple, Reggie and Carol Sumner, whom she had known since her youth. The Sumners trusted her, treated her warmly, and once even helped her buy a car. It was this trust that marked the beginning of a tragic story. In the summer of 2005, Tiffany and Michael faced financial difficulties. The desire to get money quickly, reinforced by pressure from Jackson, led to a monstrous plan to rob the Sumners. Two other people were involved in the crime, Alan Wade and Bruce Nixon, young men seeking easy money. Initially, the plan was just to steal, but over time, it turned into a well-thought-out kidnapping scheme. In July 2005, the group went to the Sumners' home in Jacksonville. Under the pretext of a friendly visit, they entered the house, tied up the couple, and forced them to reveal their bank card PIN codes. The criminals then took them to Georgia, where they had prepared the crime scene in advance. A forensic examination later determined that the elderly couple had died of suffocation, a fact that shocked the public and sparked a storm of condemnation. After the incident, Tiffany and her accomplices showed shocking indifference. They spent the stolen money, took photos of themselves in a hotel with champagne, and laughed, unaware of the impending collapse. The police, tracking transactions on the Sumners' cards, quickly tracked down the criminals. Within a few days, all four were arrested at a hotel in South Carolina. Bruce Nixon, fearing a harsh sentence, cooperated with the investigation and revealed the burial site. His confessions became decisive evidence. Tiffany Cole's trial began in October 2007 and attracted nationwide attention. Prosecutors described her as a participant in a carefully planned crime in which there was no room for compassion. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Cole was under Jackson's complete psychological control and did not realize the magnitude of what was happening. Despite this, the jury found her guilty on all counts. By a vote of 9-3, they recommended the death penalty. The judge agreed with the decision, and in 2008, Tiffany Cole was sentenced to death, becoming one of the youngest women ever to be on death row in Florida. Over the years, her story took a new turn. In 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that death sentences handed down without a unanimous jury decision must be reviewed. This decision gave Cole a chance at salvation. In August 2023, after years of appeals, the court reviewed her case. A new jury, by a vote of 10-2, replaced the death penalty with life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Today, Tiffany Ann Cole is serving her sentence in a Florida women's prison. Emilia Lily Carr, born on August 4th, 1984 in Florida, was a woman with a controversial past, an intelligent but deeply traumatized personality. Her childhood was filled with fear, violence, and instability. Psychologists noted her high intelligence, an IQ of 125, but the trauma inflicted by her tyrannical father left her feeling helpless and deeply distrustful of people. At the age of 15, she accused her father of abuse, but later recanted her testimony, a move that many later viewed as the result of psychological pressure. Years later, he was convicted of attempting to incite the murder of his own family, including Amelia. This episode forever changed her perception of love, trust, and security. Her adult life was difficult. 2 failed marriages, domestic violence, periodic problems with the law, and loneliness left the woman without support. Amelia had 3 children, whom she raised almost without help, trying to maintain the outward appearance of a normal life. But beneath the surface, internal contradictions and emotional wounds were accumulating. Everything changed in 2008 when she met Joshua Fulham, a man whose charisma and manipulative nature completely captivated her. Their relationship developed rapidly, but he soon married someone else, 26-year-old Heather Strong. Despite this, Carr continued to see him as her reason for living. Pregnant with his child, she found herself caught up in a love triangle where jealousy and resentment turned into a dangerous obsession. In February 2009, Heather Strong disappeared. She worked as a waitress and was raising 2 children, trying to escape her destructive relationship with Fulham. A month before her disappearance, she filed a report about the threats she had received, but did not have time to follow through with the case. According to the investigation, Carr and Fulham acted together in an attempt to force Heather to drop the complaint. On February 15th, she stopped communicating. A month later, on March 19th, her body was found in a shallow grave near Carr's mother's trailer. An examination determined that the woman had died of suffocation and that the crime was premeditated. At the time, Amelia was 7 months pregnant, which made the story particularly difficult for the public to accept. From the outset, investigators suspected Fulham, but it was Amelia's behavior that proved to be the deciding factor. She gave conflicting statements, returned to investigators without a lawyer, and made partial confessions. The key piece of evidence was an audio recording in which she discussed the details of the crime with Fulham's sister. This was a turning point in the case, and Amelia was arrested. While in custody, she gave birth to a daughter, and her older children were placed with relatives. The trial began in late 2010 and attracted considerable public interest. The prosecution sought the death penalty, calling the crime acts of cold-bloodedness, devoid of compassion. The defense emphasized that Carr was under Fulham's strong influence and suffered from the effects of childhood trauma. The jury deliberated for only 2.5 hours and found her guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. 7 jurors voted for the death penalty, 5 for life imprisonment. The judge upheld the majority decision, and on February 22, 2011, Amelia Carr was sentenced to death by lethal injection. A year later, Fulham was tried. He was also found guilty but received a life sentence. For many observers, this became a symbol of judicial inequality. A woman who was under the influence received a harsher sentence. In 2017, after a change in the law, death sentences handed down without a unanimous jury decision were reviewed. Amelia's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Today she is serving her sentence in a maximum security women's prison in Florida. Dalia DiPolito, born in 1982, has become one of the most talked about figures in modern U.S. criminal history. Her story is a rare example of how a personal drama turned into a spectacle watched by millions. The young woman from Florida, who appeared to lead a normal life, found herself at the center of a high-profile case involving an attempt to order the murder of her own husband, Michael DiPolito. Before her arrest, she lived in West Palm Beach, surrounded by comfort and attention. Michael had recently been released from prison, where he had been serving a sentence for fraud, and their marriage, full of jealousy, recriminations, and financial disputes, was increasingly turning into a battleground. According to investigators, it was against the backdrop of these quarrels that Dahlia decided to stage his death, hoping to get rid of her husband and gain control of his money. The story began in 2009 when Dahlia resumed communication with her former lover, Mohammed Shihadeh. It was he who informed the police that the woman had complained about her husband, calling him aggressive, and hinted that she wanted to solve the problem once and for all. The Boynton Beach Police Department organized an undercover operation. Shihadeh introduced her to Detective Vito Ginn, who played the role of a hired killer. Their meeting was recorded by a hidden camera. In the video, which went viral, Dipolito discussed the details of the upcoming murder with remarkable calm, offering $7,000 and stating that she was 5,000% sure. These words would later become symbolic of her case and be quoted in all media outlets. When the police staged the murder, the plot unfolded like a scene from a TV series. Detectives informed Dahlia of her husband's death, and the cameras of the TV show Cops, which were present at the arrest, captured her violent reaction. She screamed, cried, and acted shocked until the officers revealed the truth. Everything that was happening was staged, and her meeting with the killer was recorded. This moment became one of the most famous scenes in the history of American crime reporting, the moment when a personal crime turned into a national show. The video quickly spread across news channels, and the Dipolito case instantly became a media phenomenon. The prosecution claimed that the woman had acted deliberately, pursuing selfish goals, control over her husband's house and bank accounts. The defense, on the contrary, claimed that everything that happened was an unsuccessful scenario invented by Dahlia herself for a possible reality show, and that she was playing a role without realizing how serious the consequences would be. The first trial, held in 2011, ended with a guilty verdict. Dipolito was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, the verdict was soon overturned. The appeal pointed to excessive media influence on the jury and procedural violations. The second trial, held in 2016, ended without a decision. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. At the third trial in 2017, the prosecution again presented video recordings and telephone conversations, emphasizing the defendant's cold-bloodedness. The defense argued that the police operation was planned for the sake of television ratings and violated Dahlia's rights, but the court did not accept these arguments. At the end of the trial, the judge called Dipolito a calculating, cold-blooded, and egocentric woman for whom lying has become a tool of life. He upheld the sentence of 20 years in prison, noting that everything that happened was neither a game nor a mistake. Appeals did not change the decision. The higher courts upheld the sentence. Margaret Allen was born and lived her entire life in Titusville, Florida. Her life was far from peaceful. Constant financial difficulties, tense relationships with neighbors, and a quick temper made her life unstable. Neighbors recalled that Margaret often complained that everyone around her was deceiving her, and over time she became increasingly suspicious. Gradually, she transformed from a reserved but hardworking woman into a distrustful and irritable person who often took her anger out on those around her. Psychiatrists later noted that she may have developed signs of paranoid personality disorder, but she was never officially diagnosed. In early 2005, Wenda Wright, a 39-year-old woman who helped with the housework, was working in the Allen household. There were frequent arguments between them, and their relationship was far from peaceful. Things came to a head when Margaret claimed that $2,000 had disappeared from her purse. Convinced that Wright was responsible for the theft, she decided to deal with her herself. This outburst of anger was the beginning of a tragedy that changed both women's lives forever. The investigation established that a violent conflict had taken place between them. According to witnesses, Allen accused Wright of theft and demanded a confession. When Wright denied the accusations, Margaret flew into a rage, becoming increasingly aggressive and violent. She later enlisted the help of two male acquaintances, whom she threatened with a gun to help her dispose of the body. A few hours later, Wendy Wright's body was found in a wooded area near Route 46 in Mims. Experts determined that death was caused by mechanical asphyxiation, and the nature of the injuries indicated prolonged use of force. The Titusville police began their investigation immediately after Wenda's husband reported her disappearance. Within a few days, the investigators' attention focused on Margaret. Neighbors claimed that on the day of the crime, they saw a large bundle being carried out of her house, and Allen herself was acting nervously and avoiding communication. During a search of the house, signs of a struggle, blood, and attempts to cover them up with household chemicals were found. The evidence was overwhelming. Allen was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and assault. The trial, which began in 2011, attracted widespread public interest. The prosecution presented Margaret Allen as a woman who had lost control of herself and was driven by anger that had turned into cruelty. Prosecutors argued that her actions were deliberate and particularly cruel. The defense, on the other hand, tried to prove that Allen suffered from mental disorders and acted in a state of affect. Witnesses testified at the hearing, describing her as a person who always lived in fear of being deceived. However, these arguments did not convince the jury. After brief deliberations, the court found Allen guilty. The judge emphasized that the crime was brutal, senseless, and committed with extreme violence. Margaret Allen was sentenced to death. For many residents of Brevard County, this became a symbol not only of tragedy, but also of how destructive human rage can be when it spirals out of control. Allen spent more than a decade on death row at the Lowell Women's Correctional Facility. She was kept in strict isolation, rarely interacted with other inmates, and became increasingly withdrawn over the years. Prison staff noted that she showed little emotion, sometimes remained silent for long periods of time, and avoided conversation even with guards. On December 13, 2024, Margaret Allen died at the age of 58. The official cause of death was not disclosed, but representatives of the Department of Corrections reported that she died of natural causes. Christine Laverne Falling was born into a poor and dysfunctional family in Florida, where the age difference between her parents was itself a symbol of instability. Her father was 65 and her mother was only 16. The girl's childhood was spent in poverty, illness, and constant conflict. Due to a lack of medical care, she suffered from epilepsy and developmental delays. Doctors noted signs of mental instability, but she never received proper treatment. When her family could no longer care for her, Christine was sent to a shelter. It was there that the first warning signs appeared. The girl tortured animals and watched their reactions, explaining this as curiosity. These episodes were later considered by psychologists to be early signs of a serious personality disorder. At the age of 14, her parents married her off to a 20-year-old man. The union was short-lived. The marriage broke up after 6 weeks. After the divorce, Christina plunged into a world of obsessive fears. She convinced doctors that she was terminally ill and was hospitalized more than 50 times in 2 years. Doctors found no physical problems, but noted instability and signs of hallucinations. By the age of 16, she was declared legally incompetent. Despite this, Falling began working as a babysitter. Her neighbors trusted her with their children, unaware of her past. In February 1980, 2-year-old Cassidy Johnson died while in her care. Christina claimed that the child had fallen, but the doctor suspected that the injuries were violent in nature. His conclusion did not reach the investigators, and the case was closed. A few months later, 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis died, and 3 days later, his cousin Joseph Spring, who was also under Christina's care, died. Both cases were attributed to a viral infection, and only later would it become clear what all these tragedies had in common. In 1981, Falling returned to her hometown of Perry and got a job as a nursing assistant. On her first day, Her elderly patient, 77-year-old William Swindle, died under strange circumstances. Soon, tragedy struck again. Christina's 8-month-old niece died while she was alone with her. At the time, the death was considered accidental. It was only after the death of 10-week-old Travis Coleman in the summer of 1982 that the police noticed a pattern. Experts determined that the child had been strangled and began to compare previous cases. They all had one thing in common: Nanny Christina falling. During questioning, she unexpectedly confessed to the murder of 3 children, explaining her actions by saying that she heard voices telling her to do it. The trial began in December 1982. The prosecution argued that Falling was aware of her actions and deliberately caused harm, while the defense insisted that she suffered from severe mental disorders. Psychiatrists confirmed that she showed signs of schizophrenia and emotional instability, but found her to be sane. The court found her guilty of first-degree murder, replacing the death penalty with life imprisonment due to her health and cooperation with the investigation. Falling is serving her sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution. During her years in prison, she has behaved relatively calmly, but has been isolated, having almost no contact with other inmates. The question of a review of her sentence has been raised repeatedly in her case, but every appeal has been rejected. In 2017, the commission again denied her parole, citing a high risk of reoffending. A new hearing is scheduled for 2024, but lawyers and commission representatives believe she has almost no chance of being released. Donna Adelson, a 75-year-old resident of South Florida, was considered for many years to be a model of a successful woman, a caring mother, loving grandmother, and respected member of the local community. She was known as an energetic, educated, and determined woman who was used to keeping everything under control. But behind this outward appearance lay a personality in which pride and authority gradually gave way to an obsessive desire to control the lives of her loved ones. It was this desire for control, according to investigators, that was the catalyst for one of the most high-profile crimes in recent years: the contract killing of law professor Daniel Markel, the ex-husband of her daughter Wendy. Markel taught at Florida State University and, after the divorce, fought for custody of his 2 sons. The legal battles lasted for years and turned into a protracted war. According to prosecutors, Donna saw him as an enemy of the family and a man who had destroyed her daughter's happiness. She openly expressed her dissatisfaction with the court's decision, prohibiting Wendy from moving with her children to South Florida, and, according to the prosecution, decided to take radical action. On the morning of July 18, 2014, Markel was shot dead near his home in Tallahassee. 2 men drove up to his car and shot him as he parked in his garage. The investigation soon established that the attack had been carefully planned and had all the hallmarks of a contract killing. Within a few months, the police arrested the perpetrators, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, as well as the intermediary, Catherine Magbanua, who had a relationship with Donna's son, Charles Adelson. According to the investigation, it was he who served as the link between the clients and the perpetrators. For almost 10 years, investigators gathered evidence step by step, including recordings of conversations, financial documents, and telephone data. It gradually became clear that Donna's role was much more active than previously thought. New evidence presented in 2023 showed that she participated in discussions about plans to eliminate Markel and helped cover up the traces after the murder. According to the prosecution, it was she who offered to finance the operation, transferring the money through her son, and then tried to divert suspicion away from the family by manipulating those around them in public opinion. The trial in Tallahassee became one of the most high-profile in Florida. The courtroom was packed with journalists, and broadcasts of the hearings garnered millions of views. The prosecution described Donna as a cold-blooded and calculating woman, willing to do anything to maintain power over her family. They emphasized that the murder was not an emotional outburst. It was the result of a well-thought-out conspiracy in which every step was calculated in advance. The defense tried to prove that Donna was a victim of pressure and had no direct connection to the crime. The lawyers pointed out that the evidence was circumstantial and that the real responsibility lay with her son Charles. They reminded the jury that at the time of her arrest, Donna was an elderly woman in poor health, incapable of coordinating such a complex plan. However, the jury did not accept these arguments. After a week of hearings and testimony from dozens of witnesses, they found Donna Adelson guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy, and persecution. Judge Stephen Everett, in handing down the sentence, said that her actions were dictated by cold calculation and a selfish desire to control the lives of others. He noted that Donna had expressed neither remorse nor guilt. During the sentencing, Donna stood in handcuffs, dressed in a prison jumpsuit, and denied her involvement until the end. She claimed that she was the victim of a miscarriage of justice and that she had always acted in the best interests of her family. The judge interrupted her statement, noting that such statements only confirmed her inability to accept responsibility. Sheila Kin Warren, known throughout the country as the Killer Clown, denied her guilt for many years, even as Florida residents still remembered that day in May 1990, when a man dressed in a clown costume arrived at Marlene Warren's house with a bouquet of flowers and balloons. A few seconds after the brief phrase, "How nice," a shot rang out, and the idyll of a suburban morning turned into a nightmare. At the time, 27-year-old Sheila Kin worked for Michael Warren at his used car lot in Wellington. Colleagues noticed that there was more than just a business relationship between them. Michael was married, but his wife, Marlene, had long been suspected of wanting a divorce. According to those close to her, she had said more than once that she feared for her life and that if anything happened to her, it would be her husband's fault. Their family assets, including the business and the house, were registered in her name, which made divorce extremely disadvantageous for Michael. On May 26, 1990, on a Saturday morning, there was a knock at Marlene's door. Standing on the doorstep was a clown wearing an orange wig, white gloves, and carrying a bouquet of flowers. One of the balloons read, "You are the greatest," a message that would later become an ominous symbol of the crime. When Marlene opened the door, the clown pulled out a gun and shot her in the face. The woman fell on the doorstep, and the killer calmly left, getting into a white Chrysler LeBaron, which was later found abandoned nearby. 2 days later, Marlene died in the hospital without regaining consciousness. The investigation almost immediately turned its attention to Sheila. Salespeople at a costume shop recalled that a few days before the murder, a woman resembling her had purchased a clown costume, and supermarket cashiers confirmed the purchase of balloons identical to those found at the crime scene. Orange synthetic fibers, probably from a wig, were found in the killer's car. However, there was no direct link to the suspect, and the case soon stalled. It took 27 years before new technology allowed the investigation to be reopened. In 2017, Palm Beach County Police retrieved old evidence from the archives. Modern DNA analysis of hair found in the car matched Sheila Kin's profile. By that time, she was living in Virginia with Michael Warren, whom she later married. The couple owned a small restaurant, led a quiet life, and avoided attention. The arrest came as a shock to their neighbors, who described Sheila as a quiet woman who loved to cook and help the elderly. However, investigators claimed that she had carried out a carefully thought-out murder plan many years ago. Her motive, according to the prosecution, was simple: to get rid of her rival so she could be with Michael and gain access to his money. At the trial, the defense insisted that the evidence was unreliable. The DNA could have been a coincidence, and the witnesses could not remember the details after decades had passed. Nevertheless, the public demanded justice, calling it a case in which the truth caught up with the past. In the spring of 2023, a few days before the trial began, Sheila made a deal with the prosecution, pleading guilty to second-degree murder. In doing so, she avoided a life sentence by agreeing to a 12-year term. Taking into account the time she had already spent in custody and the mitigating factors of the old laws, She was released in the spring of 2025. Palm Beach County Prosecutor Dave Ehrenberg stated that despite her release, Sheila Kin Warren will remain in history as a convicted murderer, and the Marlene Warren case will remain a reminder that the truth never gets old. Her lawyer, on the other hand, noted that his client only pleaded guilty out of fear of a life sentence and still maintains that she was not involved in the crime. Today, Sheila Kin Warren lives under the scrutiny of the press, trying to avoid publicity. Rachel Marie Wade was born on February 27, 1990, to Barry and Janet Wade in a quiet suburb of Florida. From childhood, she gave the impression of being a sociable but impulsive girl who tended to take everything to heart. At the time of the tragic events, Rachel was working as a waitress at Applebee's restaurant, was popular with her colleagues and friends, but often experienced emotional ups and downs. Her loved ones noted that when she loved with all her heart, and when she was angry, she was violent and uncontrollable. It was this mixture of passion and jealousy that ultimately became the basis for the conflict that ended in tragedy. At the center of the story were two young women, Rachel Wade and Sarah Ludeman, both connected to one man, Josh Camacho, a 19-year-old with a reputation for being aggressive and quick-tempered. He was dating both girls at the same time, fueling their jealousy and distrust. Friends repeatedly warned the girls that their relationships with Camacho were becoming dangerous, but neither of them wanted to back down. The conflict gradually escalated from personal altercations to open confrontation. At first, it unfolded on the internet, on social media, in messages, and in phone calls. The girls exchanged harsh words and left each other voice threats. Rachel often talked about payback and promised to put an end to it. Those around them perceived this as emotional outbursts, not imagining that it would lead to a real tragedy. On the evening of April 14, 2009, the tension reached its peak. Camacho was spending time at Sarah's house, and Rachel found out about it from friends. A series of text messages and phone calls ensued. Rachel sent Josh angry messages accusing him of betrayal, then headed to the home of their mutual friend Javier Laboy, where Sarah and Josh were rumored to be. On the way, the girls exchanged phone calls. Witnesses later said that Rachel's voice sounded like a mixture of resentment and determination. When Sarah arrived at the scene, a short but fierce argument broke out between them. According to the prosecution, Rachel struck one precise blow with a knife, from which Sarah soon died. Wade herself claimed that she acted in a panic, fearing an attack. She said she carried the knife for self-defense, but the court ruled that her actions did not constitute self-defense. Sarah's last words to Camacho on the phone were tragic. "She hit me." Rachel's arrest made a strong impression on the small town. Her story quickly made the news and became a symbol of love driven to madness. During questioning, the girl cried, but then, according to investigators, she looked tired and indifferent. When she was informed of Sarah's death, she uttered a phrase that became the subject of discussion: "I'm done." The trial began in the summer of 2010 and was broadcast on regional television channels. The prosecution presented a series of recorded voice messages in which Rachel threatened her rival that it will all end badly. This evidence was decisive. The defense tried to use Florida's stand your ground law, arguing that Wade was defending herself, but the jury did not believe this version. On September 3, 2010, the court found Rachel Marie Wade guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced her to 27 years in prison. The judge noted that the tragedy was the result of a destructive mixture of jealousy, impulsiveness, and youthful pride. Today, Rachel Wade's story serves as a warning about how personal conflicts and emotional instability, fueled by social media, can lead to irreparable consequences. In prison, she behaves calmly, participates in educational programs, and, according to the administration, is trying to rethink her life. Ashley Benefield, a former ballerina and model, once shown on stage, graceful, determined, the embodiment of perfection. But behind this image was a woman torn apart by inner fears, addictions, and memories of unfulfilled dreams. Her story is a tragedy about how fragility and obsession with control can lead to irreparable consequences. Ashley met 54-year-old Douglas Benefield, a U.S. Navy veteran, in the summer of 2016 at a political event in Palm Beach. She was 24, he was almost 55. Their romance developed rapidly, and within 2 weeks the couple was married. At first, they seemed like the perfect couple. He was experienced and confident. She was young, ambitious, and dreamed of changing the world of art. Together, they founded the American National Ballet in Charleston, a project that was supposed to be the embodiment of Ashley's dream, but soon turned into a financial and personal nightmare. The company closed, and the couple's relationship began to fall apart. According to Ashley, Doug was quick-tempered, tried to control her every move, and once, in a fit of rage, shot at the ceiling. She claimed that she lived in constant fear. Doug, on the other hand, called her unbalanced, emotionally unstable, and prone to manipulation. Their conflicts increasingly escalated into mutual accusations, and the courts, to which Ashley turned with her complaints, found no evidence to support her claims. After the birth of her daughter in 2018, she finally left her husband, moved to her mother's home in Florida, and forbade him from seeing the child. Despite the breakup, they continued to communicate. Their relationship remained painful. Doug wrote her letters, asked to be allowed to see his daughter, and tried to repair their relationship, but Ashley became increasingly withdrawn, assuring her friends that her husband was dangerous and could harm her. By the fall of 2020, their relationship had turned into a tangle of mistrust, jealousy, and fear. On September 27, 2020, they met at the Lakewood Ranch to pick up Ashley's belongings. According to her, they got into an argument, and Doug grabbed her, preventing her from leaving. In a state of panic, she pulled out a gun and fired 2 shots. When the police arrived, the man was lying unconscious on the floor. Ashley, trembling and pale, repeated, "He wanted to kill me. I was just defending myself." An hour later, Doug died in the hospital. The prosecution claimed that Ashley had planned ahead. She brought the gun and staged the attack to get rid of her husband and retain sole custody of her daughter. Investigators emphasized that her claims of abuse were not corroborated and that she acted calculatedly and cold-bloodedly. The 2024 trial attracted enormous public interest. The press dubbed the case the Black Swan, drawing parallels between the image of a ballerina, lost innocence, and destruction from within. In the courtroom, Ashley appeared composed, spoke quietly, and showed little emotion. Her lawyers insisted that she suffered from battered wife syndrome, acting under the influence of years of fear. Psychiatrists called by the defense confirmed the presence of post-traumatic symptoms. The prosecution, on the other hand, portrayed her as a manipulator who used the image of a victim to justify her cold-blooded act. The jury heard the case for 6 days, and the verdict was a compromise, guilty of manslaughter. The judge called the decision tragic but fair. In December 2024, Ashley Benefield was sentenced to 20 years in prison and 10 years of probation. The judge noted that her life is an example of how fear and delusions can destroy everything a person once loved.